Hello, back to basics. Family, crew members, Iowa. Oh, brother. If you guys knew how crazy Iowa weather is, it's like being on a roller coaster, especially as it gets closer to springtime. It's like, oh, it's 50. No, it's not. It's 30. It's cold. Oh, it's sunny. No, it's not. Half hour later. So this is where we're at. Sun comes out, feels great. Sun goes down, wind kicks up, it's cold. So if you hear me sniffling, it's because it's getting cold again when I thought it was going to be so nice out here. Not really. Let's get busy. Hey, going to talk to us and kind of chat about control. And we've been talking about women's responsibilities, men's responsibilities the last couple times we've been together here. So I want to continue on that theme, but I think if we can get a little bit more practical, even more yet. And it doesn't have to be a husband-spouse relationship and when we're talking about working things out. It's any relationship. So that's kind of where I'm working on these thoughts too. Hi, Deanna. So let's dig in a little bit, and the idea I want to get to the end here is shared control in any relationship, whether it's friends, parents to kids, grown adult parents to grown adult children, obviously spouses, work relationships. And so I might jump around, and I don't mean to. I don't have any notes here. I just been chewing on this and working on it and trying to improve my own communication style and how I interact with people, leadership, just strangers, the whole thing. So we've been talking about this spirit called Jezebel. And this spirit is, honestly, it doesn't have a gender. It's a spirit. It's a neutered thing. It's just a spirit. And it can attack women and men, but it attacks them differently. As we were talking, when people have injuries or traumas from relationships, they get this fear, and it's, gosh, I don't want that to happen again. And determinant on how traumatic those injuries are, that's really how deep that spirit can get into a person's thought pattern, Christian or not. We're not going to go into that today. So for women, it was usually manipulation, and for men, it's usually intimidation. And both tactics, usually from good intended people, is to protect oneself from getting hurt again. We're not always so skilled in relationships. You think of all the classes we take all through school, and we graduate, and gosh, they never taught us how to communicate. Oh, group skill teaching. No, it might teach you how to cook or something, or make some wood things, and that's as close as we get. And financial literacies issues. Why don't we teach some stuff that really works when you leave high school? It's crazy. So with the relationship part of it, we usually learn the hard way, school of hard knocks, and a lot of that involves pain and recovery, forgiveness, and most of us have figured out early our people picker skill is not up to snuff. We usually get into relationships and find out the wrong way, how to trust people, how to build trust. And so all that goes into how well we think we need to protect ourselves in relationships. And I'm thinking of the book of James, and he talks about wisdom in this book quite a bit, and asking God for wisdom. And then in chapter 3, he talks about the tongue being an evil thing that, even Proverbs says, out of the abundance of the mouth, abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks, and death and life are in the power of the tongue. But in that verse, I think it's 15 in chapter 3, he talks about selfish ambition. Well, selfish ambition is pushing to have our will done, our personal endeavors. Like, I'm going to get this done regardless, right? And that's a struggle, because sometimes we think we're hearing from God and we push to get this done, and we're not going to let anyone get in the way. Well, my opinion is if God is moving upon us to do something, he brings people alongside to help accomplish it, not get in the way. So that's a perception issue usually too, of being wounded. This world's against me. No, we're not victims. Yeah. So this can go down many rabbit trails, which I'm trying to stay away from. Going back to the shared control part. In that book of James, chapter 3, the selfish ambition is followed up, and he talks about the wisdom that follows selfish ambition is first earthly, like natural, and then soulish, and then demonic. What's so interesting is when we're pushing our will, period, like my will, your will, and we're trying to get something done, and we're just bent on it. We're stubborn, rebellious, and I'm going to do this, and you know how it goes. If we stay on that track long enough, a demonic entrance happens. This is what Scripture says. And then not only are we really damaging ourselves and others, but now we're causing like this ripple effect maybe for future generations, people around us. And what I'm bring us out of this spiral of being in a relationship where you know you're butting heads with your closest friend or your spouse or whatever, your boss. And there's order in our lives, you know, for a reason, because order allows people to know where they fit. And, you know, Jesus submitted to God the Father, and I never read once where he felt offended that he had to submit to God. Yeah. It's like he didn't see it as a bad thing. He knew this was the place he belonged, and God's will was there. And in the family, this is where it's a little bit more harder to realize, because at work you know who the boss is and who isn't. Well, usually, well, at least by title, you know. And you see those things happen where someone wears the title but someone else wears the pants, and that can happen in the home. Well, God's intention for our relationships is to have shared control. That's the healthiest place a relationship is vibrant, and each person is throwing in their best shot with wisdom and experience, you know, the whole thing. But if one person is continually getting their way and the other person doesn't get a chance to have a say in it, well, that's called control. Now, manipulation and intimidation, besides protecting oneself from future harm, it causes harm to other people. And God has never intended for some person or some group of people to dominate anyone. No, that's never the thing. And, you know, we have a lot of people that reach out to our ministry and they're like, why does God do this? Or why is he not doing that? I said, you know, God respects your personal will. He doesn't steamroll people. And I suggest you don't do it to others. You know, people get upset about that too. Well, but they're doing this. Okay, but what is your responsibility? And I always try to get us, sorry, my battery's getting low. So I always try to bring us back to what is called self-control. Other control, you know, is fruitless and it's just frustrating, and we get resentful and bitter and just start grinding our teeth at people and getting angry about it. And that's what God will hopefully convict us. Now, what's frustrating is if you're working with someone, whether it's your boss or your spouse, your kids, and you're having this friction and they're not wanting to hear truth. Oh my goodness, right? It's like, really? I remember a story about this zookeeper. He had this big bull elephant, and it had been there for years, and they brought in a couple new bull elephants. They're probably half the size of the big one. And he said the little ones learned real quick who was boss, because they would charge the bull elephant and they'd run into it and fall down. The bull elephant didn't move. Now, if you know what healthy boundaries are, what you own and what you don't own, what you're responsible for, that point gives you a place to stand your ground. It's a military term too, like Paul was saying in Ephesians 6 when he's talking about the army. He says sometimes you just need to stand your ground, and you stand with grace. You stand on that truth, and you know where you stand, and you don't have to be mean or angry towards anyone, because you have peace. And peace is where real strength comes from. We got a truck coming up here, probably won't hear me. Hold on. Sorry about that. It's usually pretty quiet at the cemetery. Yeah. Anyway, I'm usually the one talking out here. It's terrible jokes. Hey, Amy. Hi, Ashley. Hey, Juan. Hey, Gavin, you on here too? Hey, Gavin. Good to see you. So the practical part about how to do this, when I talk in generalities, I use the stories from the Bible because they're good examples. Like if you read 1 Kings 18, there's the Jezebel woman. She becomes a queen and exchanged from her father to King Ahab for like a peace treaties with Israel. Well, she was used. She's wounded by male authority, and she doesn't have any authority. So she wants to get authority. The only way to get it is to ask for it or manipulate or intimidate to get it. So the Jezebel spirit doesn't have authority until someone gives it to her. And King Ahab, as the name is there in the Old Testament, we would say there was a spirit of Ahab that still functions today. So in a relationship, whether it's man or woman, these are non-gender spirits, right? Okay? A Jezebel spirit, a controlling spirit can work inside a man or woman. So if we have a domineering person in a relationship and they're taking over places and items and thoughts that aren't theirs, they're obviously out of bounds, so to speak. They've overstepped their limit, however you want to phrase it. They're usurping authority that doesn't belong to them. And every one of us has a normal, autonomous authority to self. Like we're responsible for our own actions, our own thoughts, our own emotions. We have a responsibility to people, but not for them. And it's really hard sometimes to keep that clear when you're heated in an argument. So if I treat someone correctly and I'm being kind and I'm respecting their boundaries, I did my part to that relationship. And whatever response, they're responsible for that part, right? And if I think I'm responsible for them to be kind because I treated them kind, I'll be sorely disappointed several times a day, maybe. Who knows? So what happens in adjusting to a person that's not willing to hear you talk to them about, hey, I feel like we're butting heads, and I'm thinking that you're getting your way a lot, and I'd like to be part of this relationship, and we share this control instead of maybe we both trying to get our own way. These conversations are extremely hard to have, especially if the other person is not wanting to get out of control, because that's what will happen to the person that's trying to control. And to be honest, control is an illusion, as you guys know. So what I've learned over the years and still practice and still fail at is if you can't have the conversation, you still can hold fast and stand put in knowing your boundaries, knowing what you own, knowing what they own, and not owning theirs. You stand your ground and you stand firm. Because if you don't give your autonomy away, your authority, your personal authority over your own body, your own thoughts, your own feelings, your own emotions, if you don't give that to someone else, they don't have authority over you. But if you submit to someone who's trying to control your life through intimidation, like threats. If you do that again, I'm leaving. If you do that again, you're not getting sex tonight. All the threats that go on in relationships, it's disgusting. Well, we can just say, you don't have to threaten people. You just let them know these are the natural consequences when something comes up. So threats don't really do any good. Usually they're empty, right? Most threats are empty. You can have good conversations where you're like, hey, that hurt. This behavior's not good for me. I want to connect with you, but when you do this, this is what goes on inside of me. Well, again, if they can't hear that, you still have to be able to hold your ground and let them deal with their own problems. Now, on the other side of the person called, let's call it, the Ahab spirit. This demonic influence comes into those people who sulk, get into self-pity. I'm the victim, and so forth. And, that Ahab spirit, when it acts that way, when we get into self-pity and pity party, and we make it a behavior where it's so consistent to get our way, it's a form of manipulation, where we make people walk around on eggshells around us because we're so angry and we're intimidating them. That stuff's destructive. Now, I'm not saying I don't do it because I struggle with this stuff. I'm talking about things I'm trying to win for my personal life. And I want my relationships to get better. So if the Ahab person can work through not sulking, because when we get hurt, we recoil. It's a normal thing. We kind of act like turtles and go back in our shell, and people come knocking on it, flipping us over, but we never come out. We're like, yeah, screw that. I'm not coming out. You're going to hurt me again. Or we get prickly. I call it the porcupine syndrome, where people get near us and we're like, throw out some quills at them, like, yeah, see how you like that, getting close to me. It's so silly. They're natural reactions. And at some point, they're going to come out. But if we practice these things over and over and they become habits, we will have demonic activity. So with that said, as a person that prays, there is something we need to be careful of. 1 Samuel 13 talks about King Saul when he was offering a sacrifice, and it was only to be offered by Samuel, and he did it. He didn't want to wait for Samuel to show up, and he was scared of the people. Samuel shows up and he says, "Why'd you do that? Do you not know that rebellion is as the sin of witchcraft?" So, rebellion is a person that doesn't want to submit to God's authority. And I'm not saying just, oh God, I submit to you, but the authority that comes with God's order in relationships. Respecting people's boundaries is order. That's God's authority. So, this is going to be a hard one to swallow for some people, because I think we've all done it. We have our natural body, we have a soul, and we have a spirit. Now, if our soul is pushing to get our own will, like we just talked about, the soul that is not submitted to God's will pray, will put out words into the atmosphere of their own will. Now, a person that soulishly prays, remember, life and death are in the power of the tongue, can get to a point where the enemy is using their words to bring change through witchcraft. You guys like, no way. Yes way. And I would say, looking at America, witchcraft might be more prevalent in America than Africa because of the issue of control and rebellion. Because that's what witchcraft is. It's to dominate another person. So if you have this fictitious family where, let's just say, the mother-in-law or father-in-law are really overbearing and trying to run the family that they're not even in anymore, their kids and the grandkids, and they're praying these soulish prayers that oh God, you know that we're not being around here. Lord, you should be sending these kids over our house every Sunday after church. And you know what I'm getting at. Well, these get empowered by the enemy, and there's this feeling of guilt. I'm not talking about conviction. Conviction brings hope for change. Guilt makes you feel like you just want to curl up and run away and never talk to people again. So feeling guilt in a relationship is not healthy. That's a sign someone's trying to control someone. So with soulish prayers, be careful. Be careful what you're praying. Are you praying God's will, or are you praying that you hope God will do your will? We all fall into this. Now, to the extent people do it, that's a whole nother intention of the human heart. And, the ministry that the Lord's given us, I've run into real witches, real warlocks. They write out curses. They chant them over against me in this ministry, for sure. And then there's people that I run into that they're like, oh, Mr. Ellis, I'm praying for you that God will. I was like, no, I'm good. I don't need you to pray that God will do anything with me except protect me. I don't need you telling me what I need to do. Oh, I pray God will use you in this way. No, he'll tell me how he's going to use me, and he would confirm that with others. You don't need to tell me what God's... those people, oh, God told me to tell you. Really? Well, he should have told me first, because I'm the one that should be hearing from him, not you. It's so being careful that God speaks to us through people, but it's usually a confirmation, not like direction, unless you're really out there and you're in desperate need. So these are things that absolutely can be used daily. Is like, okay, so let's get back to the meat here. The spiritual life allows freedom for others. The soulish life has strings attached to it. You know, in the beginning when God created man, he said, you are a living soul. And it says he took a breath, man took a breath. God breathed into the nostrils, right? Christ, who gave us his spirit, is a life-giving spirit. The nicest person that you know that's not a Christian still has strings attached to whatever they do, even when giving. Only the Holy Spirit, inspired through Christ in us, can give with no strings. So that's the other concept, is knowing where the root or where the source of what we're doing and motivation is coming from. So working through that. And the other thing I want to leave you guys with is we are responsible for ourselves. Do an inventory on your thoughts, your emotions, things around you, and realize what you're responsible for. And check yourself. Are you taking on the responsibility of making sure your spouse is happy? That's their job. That's their personal work. Now, your goal is to be responsible to them as a husband or as an employee or as a good friend. We're responsible to others. You know, am I my brother's keeper? Yes, to a point you are. But everyone's responsible for tending to their own garden, upweeding their own weeds and getting to that garden and taking care of it and watering it. And it's just normal self-care. It's like living next door to a good neighbor on one side and a bad neighbor on the other. The good neighbor, you know, he'll come over and the leaves that fell off his tree, he'll clean them up. You know, if his dog poops in your yard, he'll clean it up. And the other neighbor might have just the opposite. Well, you have a fence around your yard and you know what you own and you know what they own. And, you know, this other neighbor likes to just kind of walk in your house, like, without knocking. You're like, dude, are you serious right now? And that's very similar to what happens when people cross our boundaries. You know, they're not asking, they're just demanding. And a lot of immaturity happens that way. And, you know, if it's no ill will intent, it's just, hey, I'm learning. We grace each other that way. Yeah, crazy stuff. But since we talked about women and men the last few times, I figured we're like, okay, how do you wrap these discussions up and make sure that we're yep, my battery's dying. So let's go to work this next month and just consider some simple steps. Don't make it difficult here. Like, shared control is the thing we want to be practicing. Everyone has a purpose in an environment, an organization. Everyone has a place. Maybe we need to figure out what is our place. And in that place, here is my role. These are my responsibilities. And those are outlined in Scripture for a purpose of creating peace and harmony and staying in our lane. I love that. Why don't you stay in your lane, you know? We've all been, yeah, it's terrible. So start there, listen to each other, respect one another, share this video with your spouse or best friend or whoever you're butting heads with. Say, let's just listen to this together. I think we both can learn. You know, if they have the reaction like, no, I'm good, well then that's just up to them, you know, whatever it is. There's another resource out there by Dr. Cloud, Henry Cloud, and he has boundaries.me, I think it is, or .com, but he has a book on boundaries. He has courses. Excellent stuff just to begin to organize your thoughts and stuff with whoever you're in a relationship with. They have them for marriage, for dating, teens, parenting. Anyway, Lord bless you guys. Thanks for joining me.